Welcome to another episode of Insights from the Trenches, a series dedicated to helping ADHD couples thrive by empowering couples with insights from ADHD experts and ADHD peers. I'm Alice, your host. In this episode, I speak with Dr. Mark Bertin, a developmental pediatrician and author who integrates mindfulness into ADHD care. He shares how mindfulness can support individuals with ADHD and strengthen relationships by improving communication, emotional regulation, and connection. So grab a cup of coffee and let's thrive together. Hi, Mark. Nice to see you today.
How are you doing today? It's so good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
No problem. I know you through our conversation, but my audience might not. But just in case, could you tell my audience a little bit about yourself and your ADHD journey?
Sure. Might be different than some of the guests you have, probably. I'm a developmental pediatrician. So I work with families who are dealing with various developmental challenges. But I also grew up around the field of special education. So it's been a big part of my life since I was probably in middle school. Started volunteering locally, and I've really worked with kids my whole life in that way. As part of my clinical practice, sort of tying to today's topic or being here, I think I realized early on in working particularly with kids with developmental differences that, really you can't without talking about the whole family. I think primarily initially because there just is a big stress and impact on whole families, and parents are often feeling swamped and overwhelmed and challenged in different ways. And then also, obviously, there's some genetics to ADHD, which is specifically why we're here. So in terms of my ADHD journey, and the reason why I'm here, I think, is because over the years, I've worked more and more with supporting parents and families. And that's why I started integrating mindfulness into ADHD care really primarily at first, is to support family well-being. I think that's what got me here.
That's great. So why did you first begin integrating mindfulness with ADHD and families? I don't quite understand that. What got you there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of been a journey. I was very fortunate, I feel, to be introduced to mindfulness individually during residency by actually another doctor. And it kind of clicked for me really from the start. Doesn't for everybody, but that's how it felt for me, as a way to just sort of self-regulate and manage my own stress and emotion during a hard part of my life. I would say, just as a side note, just as a good lead into a conversation like this, one of the things that clicked for me very early on is there's a very fundamental teaching when it comes to mindfulness to ask of everything you hear, is it true? Don't take it on faith. Don't just really look and say, like, would this really be useful for me? And we can talk a little bit about that today and what mindfulness means. But I practiced myself for, I don't even know how long at this point, probably a decade, maybe a little less. Really found it helpful because it's all about dealing with real life as skillfully as possible. And went to a medical conference on the science of mindfulness and stress and neuroplasticity, and really had, over the course of a weekend, almost like what I feel like on a personal level is almost like an epiphany of, like, wait a second, here I am professionally working with all these parents and families that are so stressed and overwhelmed, and no one's really doing anything specific to support the parents of these kids who are having challenges in school. And, now we know there's research showing what's common sense is that parents of kids with challenges are more anxious often, and they are higher risk for depression and marital strife and all these individual challenges. And over the course of this one research conference, happened to be chaired by the Dalai Lama, but it was still a research conference, just like this light bulb went on of, like, why am I keeping these things separate? Like, this has been so helpful for me. And this was really right when the research was starting to show how beneficial this was. And I just really, over the course of that weekend, almost decided to go get trained in how to teach it more. And ever since then have just been really leading with the idea. I think, you and I have talked, like, I have a retreat going on in the fall that really focuses on emotional regulation and living with ADHD, because really leading with the idea that if we're going to take care of ourselves and others on a very fundamental, not cliched level, we really are going to benefit everybody if we start with our own, getting our own feet on the ground. And one of my favorite definitions of mindfulness is it's actively training, the traits and skills that just help us relate to whatever is really going on well. It's not all the cliches. It's never going to be a shut off mind. We don't want that. It's not calm all the time. It's just recognizing that life pushes us into a lot of stress and reactivity, and emotions build on emotions, and things can feel very much reactive, autopilot, unsettled for long stretches of time. So mindfulness is like an active way of just trying to build other habits instead, very practical ones like patience and awareness, kindness and compassion, which then let us manage whatever else is actually happening with more skill, more in line with our best intentions. And that sounds very grandiose, I think, the way I said it just now, but it's very, it's like a gym program. It's like, we can choose to stay caught up in all the reactivity and the overwhelm, or we can try to make a dent by practicing something else instead. And that's really what mindfulness is. It's not pie in the sky. It's, it's rolling up your sleeves and saying, like, I really would benefit from working on patience a little bit, or being a little more aware of what's going on moment to moment, or, skills like that.
That's great. So a lot of people associate mindfulness as sitting down and doing meditation.
Yes.
From what you describe is something completely different.
Can you
share more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not that. It's just that that's not the intention. And there are many ways to describe mindfulness, but mindfulness is an intention for how we're trying to live moment to moment. Basically, mindfulness means aiming to do the best we can with a lot of imperfection, but aiming to do the best we can to pay moment attention in an unbiased way to what's actually going on, with a sense of kindness and compassion. That's how I would define it today. It changes all the time, and that's a lofty goal, and no one expects it to be perfect. It's just recognizing that most people aren't. I mean, one of my favorite teachers once said after our talk on difficult communication, which would probably be a good topic for today too, no one really does this perfectly, but how many people are actually trying? So it's just aiming to do that more often, to live that way more often. So mindfulness is a way of approaching daily life. It's aiming to just live that way more consistently. Meditation is a tool to build those traits. So the goal of meditation, if there is any, is simply to meditate, because when we meditate, if we drop our preconceived notions of it, it's not shutting off thoughts. You're never going to have a completely still mind. It's okay to be bored and restless. You can't do it well or can't do it poorly. It's more like if you've never run a marathon and decide it would be really cool to run the New York Marathon, you got to start somewhere. You run to the ends of the block and back for a while, and then you extend it, and then you extend it. And even then, for most of us, you're never going to be a championship, marathon runner, and there's no championship meditation. It's just, okay, I'm going to train these traits. So the lead most often for me when I'm teaching lately is realizing that there's a whole lot of value to just working on patience, just working on giving yourself permission for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you choose, to experience whatever's happening without all the reactivity, without all the habit. I'm going to just, unless there's an actual emergency in this moment, if I'm hungry, I'm not going to do my hunger thing. And if I'm angry, I'm not going to do my anger thing. And if I'm anxious, I'm not going to do my anxious thing. And you just start building the ability to experience those things without all that reactive habit, without all the patterns that you've developed over a lifetime, which is how we get in touch with our own intentions in life. It's one of the things. And mindfulness means way more than that. With ADHD, I think mindfulness is one of the only things that's been shown to be a direct training in emotional regulation. Well, I guess I didn't finish my thought earlier, which is why that fall retreat is just focused on, if we can develop emotional regulation and manage stress and see with more clarity, then we can do all the rest of ADHD care. We're going to feel better for one thing, but everything else will fall into place more easily. And I think that's a really important starting point for ADHD, because whether you're trying to figure out how to parent do all the wild and crazy parent training stuff as a parent that's really intensive and difficult sometimes, or if you're trying to manage communication in a marriage, or if you're trying to manage communication with kids or make hard decisions, all of that, the only thing any of us directly control is our own place in that discussion, our own place in that decision. And we're all going to, I think it's intuitive, we're all going to make more skillful choices when we're more settled, more in touch with ourselves. So it's really meant to be very hands-on and practical, but the meditation is a tool that's meant to develop traits that are then going to spill over into living life a certain way, which is not, by the way, I'll just say it one, hopefully last time, but it's not meant to impose anything on you. It's like one of the assumptions is, you probably have your own best intentions that are probably pretty wonderful. I mean, most of us aren't actively trying to do bad in the world or actively trying to make mistakes. So we all have our own best selves and our best intentions to come back to. I'm just back from vacation. Today is going to be a whole lot more settled day in dealing with everyday life because that's what vacation does. So we all know that. So mindfulness is a way of just trying to stay in touch with doing the best we can to manage whatever is happening.
That sounds good. So thanks for the definition on mindfulness. You brought up something very interesting, which is emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit more on how a practice of mindfulness can help you regulate your emotion better?
Absolutely. I think it's really often overlooked just how fundamental having a hard time managing emotion is to ADHD. And that affects how you feel, but that also affects how you communicate and behave sometimes. And it's nobody's fault. It's just a aspect of having trouble with executive function. So there's so many ways. I'll try to do it kind of step by step in terms of managing emotion, because I love speaking about managing emotion. I can go on and on, but to keep it concise, part one is part of managing emotion is awareness of emotion. Some of the cliches hold true in this case. And so in order to even begin to manage emotion, we need to be able to be aware of emotion. And that means so many different things. That can start with body awareness. We feel our emotions. So practicing body awareness, which can be a mindfulness practice, might help you recognize when you're becoming stressed while you can still manage it, or when you're becoming anxious, or just, this is how I feel when I'm about to explode in anger. That kind of awareness can help you manage that emotion as it arises. But more than that, a lot of research suggesting that the more complex our emotional vocabulary is, helps us manage emotions. The more nuanced we can be in telling the difference between anger and frustration and jealousy and all these related emotions actually helps us manage them differently. So there's practices that help you just while you're sitting in meditation, sort of turn towards emotion and see if you can identify the feelings you're feeling with more consistency. So one part is just working with the awareness aspect of mindfulness practice. Then I alluded to the concept of developing patience, and really it's almost the same concept when it comes to managing emotions in some level, because then you can expand that. You can start to observe, like, well, these are the habits I've developed around anger, which, the cliche is lashing out, but it can just as easily be shutting down or whatever else people do. And then for those few minutes of meditation, and by the way, meditation, mindfulness, is not meant to be passive. It's meant to be in touch with our intentions. So during practice, the practice might be, unless it's an emergency, I'm just going to sit here, but that's not because that's how you're going to live life. It's just because for those few minutes, that's the intention. I'm going to practice. So that concept of patience has directly to do with emotion, because you can do the same thing with an emotion. Like for these X number of minutes, I'm going to do my best to be aware of my emotional state, and I'm going to, with patience, with awareness, and not my typical habit, whether that's a cognitive habit or an actual, action you're taking. So that's the second thing, is it's really a direct training in emotional self-management skills. For these 15 or 20 minutes, whatever's going on for me emotionally, I'm going to aim for acceptance and compassion and patience, and not all the other stuff I typically add to it. And that's as close as I know to direct training in emotional self-management skills. And then there's another component of it that I think is very important to look at with ADHD, which is there's a whole lot of experience with ADHD that often has to do with a concept called the inner critic. In the ADHD world, it could be rejection sensitivity, or it could be, self-confidence, or, there's many facets to it. And another aspect of mindfulness practice is often referred to as self-compassion practice, which is certainly one of those things that might trigger some people, but I promise you it's meant to be very accessible. It's just really working with the idea that we're often way harsher with ourselves than we would be with anybody else in life. And if you practice with that, it is actually possible to shift that habit to not that you're unrealistically perfect. We all make mistakes. We all have to make amends, but it's much easier to do that actually if we treat ourselves realistically. So self-compassion practice is just aiming to develop a mental habit of treating ourselves more like we would a loved one, and it has a ton of research behind it. Like if anyone questions that or is curious about that, I would look up Kristen Neff's website at the University of Austin. She's done a lot of really solid research around that. So all of that goes into being managed emotion.
So it sounds like this is a great tool for both partners to use to get a hold of their emotions.
100%. Mindfulness doesn't fix anything. It's like a framework that supports a lot of different things. And one of the things I love talking about is mindfulness and communication, which is obviously the foundation of relationship. And the short version for today would be that, unmanaged emotions drive the bus, right? I mean, if your emotions are taken over, that is going to affect how you think and how you feel and how you speak. And so that goes both for somebody with ADHD, which again, does not mean perfection, but if you're managing your emotions skillfully, maybe that allows you to make amends more easily after you blow up, or notice you're about to blow up and say, look, let's just pause and I'm going to come back to this in 30 minutes, or, whatever it is. It doesn't mean you're going to do it 100% of the time, but just like whatever happens, it helps you handle it differently. And then also maybe through practice over time, you do handle your emotions differently. That also happens. And then clearly, if you're the spouse who doesn't have ADHD in the situation, just knowing that emotional reactivity is an ADHD symptom doesn't make the stress of those moments go away. So managing your own emotional response with more nuance clearly is going to help manage the immediacy of the situation, manage the recovery from when an emotion takes over, manage the insidious side of an emotion when it just sort of, if it's not handled or if it's ignored, sort of ferments under the surface, which is really common when we're not paying attention to emotion. So it's that same idea that I don't think any of these things necessarily replace any other part of ADHD care, but they very uniquely support all of ADHD care, relationship, communication, because that sense of compassionate awareness just lets us stay in touch with our best selves more regularly.
So I want to dig back into one thing that you said. I think it's super important.
Mm-hmm.
One of the fact that a lot of ADHD partners are not very confident with their other partners just because of the criticism they receive or the shame they feel.
Mm-hmm.
How can mindfulness, and you talked about self-compassion here, like what type of practice could help them rebuild that confidence? Because you're right, having confidence help you be able to see what's happening and articulate what's going on so that you can have better communication.
Well, I'll actually start with the non-ADHD partners. I'm going to talk about it both ways. There is research out there that suggests that a healthy relationship has at least a 3-to-1 ratio of positive to corrective feedback, right? That gets quoted a lot. And since ADHD tends to lead to a lot of challenges, I don't know what word to use, forgetfulness and running late and all these things that are no one's intention, but they're just part of ADHD, it can skew that balance really quick, separate from all the other relationship complexities. Some of it's just logistical. I mean, especially when I work with parents and kids a lot. I mean, there's just a lot of need for redirection and things being missed. So as the non-ADHD partner working with paying attention to the positive moments and positive feedback as a mindful sort of and praise almost as mindfulness practices, because the brain gets caught up in the negativity bias. Like we sort of take for granted the things that are going well and don't comment on them and only comment when things are off. And it creates this dynamic. So if you're the person without ADHD, you certainly can shift the foundation, raise the floor almost just by working with a more full awareness. It's not that you don't make the corrections, although maybe you let go of some stuff if you can, but it's more that you create you just create a more fuller, more positive experience overall through that. There's a wonderful teacher who works with teens, Wendy Mogul. Doesn't relate to ADHD actually, but she calls it putting money in the bank with teenagers. And it's the same idea. Like, you you're going to have your challenges. So you want to overemphasize the positive so that when it's time to hit the challenge, you have something to draw on. And you can also, as a non-ADHD spouse, work with compassion. Compassion practice doesn't mean everybody is off the hook for the mistakes they make, but it's a really actively trying to recognize that everybody is struggling, everybody's trying to do the best they can, whatever it looks like on the outside, and staying in touch with that concept really can change a lot. I saw someone, I'm going off on a slight tangent and then I'll come back. But, I saw a parent sometime in the last few years. It's a story I've been telling a lot. We hadn't even started working together, just came back from my having explained ADHD to them and said things were already better at home. And I could tell she was kind of half joking. So I was able to joke back and I said, that's pretty amazing because we haven't done anything yet. And she said, oh yeah, but now that I know that the emotional reactivity is part of his ADHD, I don't blame him for it anymore. But now what are we going to do? It wasn't like his tantrums had gone away, but it had changed so much, but she just sort of dropped the blame. So that's on the non-ADHD side. For someone with ADHD, self-compassion practice, we could have spoken about as like our entire conversation today, but it's an active practice in which usually described as a practice in 3 parts. The concept is, and any of you could do this just listening right now, with or without ADHD, you can just recognize, like the example Kristen Neff sometimes uses is, if I was in the front of an auditorium speaking right now and called you to the front of the auditorium, and just as you reach the stage, you completely face planted, spilled coffee on people, papers everywhere, hundreds of people watching you on the floor. Just think for a second what your first thoughts would be about yourself. I'm not good enough. This always happens. I want to go hide, whatever it is. And now just think for a moment, if you were in the front row of the same auditorium and your best friend was called to the podium and did exactly the same thing. What would you do? What would you say? It's okay. These things happen. No one's judging you for it. It's all going to be fine. Take a second. You're going to be all right. And really the heart of Kristen's research is that when we can learn to treat ourselves that same way, again, we all have stuff to work on. We all make mistakes, but we can still try to treat ourselves that way. It may seem a little something to people who haven't come across it before, but it's really just a mental habit, and it is one that we can cultivate with practice. And like you said, you can imagine in any situation, if our own self-confidence, and really the flip side of that, if our own defensiveness is different, then we're just going to handle it more skillfully. You can pick almost any example. Like if someone comes up to you and is annoyed with something that you are defensive about, like maybe a symptom of ADHD, like forgetfulness or running late, and says in a benign way, like you're late, but they don't even necessarily mean something by it. If you're feeling down and defensive, that's going to change how you communicate back. If that same person came up to you and said, like, I can't believe you're wearing a shirt today. It's like, you're not going to be you're not going to take it personally. You're not going to be defensive. It's like, what? Of course I'm wearing a shirt today. It's like a whole other path you go down because it's not something that you're triggered by. So that, if you make a practice of self-compassion, which the practice itself is usually described as having 3 components. It might just be easier for an interview this length. So you can go to my website. I have it. I've written about it. Practices you can guide. Kristen Neff's website is wonderful. There's many people, who do a lot of work with it. It's meant to be a practice with almost like 3 reminders to just keep reminding yourself of until they stick. The first one is actually your mindfulness practice itself, which may feel abstract, but in many ways, because of how the mind works, giving ourselves permission to just see with clarity and accept whatever is actually happening is an act of self-compassion in many ways, because we're often denying that we're angry or denying that we feel bad or denying, it's like so just part 1 is just, can I just in this moment really allow myself to experience whatever I happen to be experiencing today? Or maybe you feel like you shouldn't feel good because there's so many bad things going on in the world, but you do feel good, or whatever it is. It's just like, this is what's happening today. The second part, which I think is very powerful with ADHD, is called common humanity. And it's like, as part of the practice, or when challenges happen in life, reminding yourself on the simplest level, this kind of thing happens to everybody. Everyone has times like this. Because we isolate ourselves and we get so harsh on ourselves so regularly in life that we sometimes need that reminder of like, I'm not the only one who, whatever, that's such a common inner voice for people of like, oh, I'm the only idiot who, whatever, fill in the blank, right? So we're working with that. It's like, no, like everyone has days like this. Everyone makes mistakes, whatever comes to mind. And that's a very powerful thing to work with over and over and over again of like, I'm not the only one who does this. Lots of people have these times. And then the third one is probably the subtlest for a shorter talk like this, which is just trying to come up with a phrase for like how would I treat a friend in this moment? And that's really what it is. It's like, so you say, and may I stay kind with myself right now? And it's not that the critic goes to sleep. The critic may always be there, but you develop more of a habit of like, oh, I'm feeling kind of down on myself. May I just stay kind? May I just be, may I just come back? And, it's all about habit. You eventually, I know from experience, you eventually get to the point where you start to go down that rabbit hole of self-criticism and just go, no, and whatever phrase you've come up with, it's like you start to it's almost like talking back to the critical a bit. You don't get pulled into that really self-destructive path, and it's just like, no, I hear that, but it's okay. I did my best, or whatever it is that clicks for you. And again, ask yourself, is it true? It's not that suddenly you feel that way radically different. It's that if you just work with that regularly, just changes how you relate to your own experience.
Thank you for sharing all those exciting practices of how you can help yourself to have more self-compassion and all that. Because as you talk more about it, I really do see how mindfulness can help you separate from all the negative thoughts of what's not happening or not going right in your relationship, and start helping you to repair and recover in your relationship, and then build new, I would say, communication habits by being mindful of what you're saying, and then develop that compassion for the other partner. So really, really powerful stuff. Let me ask you another question. Is mindfulness practice on someone that is not taking medication, how effective is it?
A great question. Here's the thing about mindfulness practice. It's the same either way. It's harder, I've heard, if you're off medication. Your mind's going, perhaps you're busier, perhaps your mind's busier, you're more restless. But if you reframe the practice of noticing whatever is actually going on with patients, with or without ADHD, any practice is practice. And it's not, I'm writing an article right now with someone on mindfulness and ADHD, and it was like a major reframe for the people who are hosting the article, basically, of just recognizing like we're not modifying this in a radical way with ADHD. So if you're off medication, it's going to be more challenging because everybody has challenging days with meditation, and maybe you'll have more of them without your medication because your mind's a little busier and it's harder to sit still and your impulsivity's up. But if you reframe it as like, I'm just going to do my best to practice with that, that's fine too. That's still meditation. And from what I've heard with people with ADHD, certainly meditation's a whole lot easier if you take your medication. Many people have told me that.
Good to know. So you have a retreat coming up.
I do.
Tell me more about that retreat.
Oh, well, I'm so looking forward to that. I kind of alluded to it earlier, that premise, well, there's a bigger premise of the retreat, which we certainly picked fall in the Catskills intentionally because we wanted to focus on self-regulation and some outdoor time, and really the idea that everybody can benefit from these skills of learning to settle and be more aware, right? So the retreat is meant to integrate the idea of mindfulness and emotional regulation and self-compassion in a little bit of a more intensive way. It's often an easier way to get started with mindfulness practice for some people, is to do it a little more intensively, while helping people understand ADHD better too. So there's going to be a lot of ADHD related information there. And really through it all, kind of like the through line is if we can come back to our own sense of being grounded and more in touch with our own best intentions, which relies on emotional regulation and awareness, then we'll be able to better handle whatever comes up, with more skill. So the premise of the retreat is getting back in touch with patience, or equanimity, sometimes it's called, and compassion and joy, even, of just like life gets us away from that. Certainly the world right now gets us away from that pretty easily. And just, in an unforced but practice-oriented kind of way, how can we stay more in touch with those kind of fundamentals of living well, and hopefully have a lot of fun. That's kind of the goal. So not overly intensive, in that got to keep it light, and none of this is so easy to work with. So you do your best, and I think people get a lot out of it. There's only a few spots. We kept it small, so it would be intimate and individualized. So.
And is this for just the ADHD partner, or for
thank you for, I should have said that up front. Thank you for asking that. No, it's meant for anybody living with ADHD. So we're expecting some mix of adults with ADHD. It's for adults, not kids this time around, but for adults with ADHD, there might be some few professionals there learning about ADHD, spouses of people living with ADHD, really anyone involved with the whole adult ADHD experience in any way. Certainly lends itself to couples very easily because some of the rooms are doubled. So really anyone who wants to find out more, maybe get their toe in the water about mindfulness and self-compassion. And also, we can individualize some of the, everything's gonna be individual. That's why it's small. So depending on who shows up, we can more sort of individualize some of the experience.
Great. Yeah. So for anyone that's listening out there, if you want to learn mindfulness with Mark directly, this is a great opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, please join. I think it's going to be a really fun weekend, and also get your ADHD question answers too.
Fantastic. Last question.
Mm-hmm.
If people want to get in touch with you and work with you, how can they contact you?
Best way to find me is always through my website, which is developmentaldoctor.com, and you'll find a lot of information there too. So there's so much misinformation out there, so I try to keep it as a resource hub of around ADHD and mindfulness and child development. Classes that I teach tend to be up there. I have some drop-in programs, like on every Monday morning there's a drop-in, and once a month for healthcare providers. And so all the information for all that kind of stuff is going to be there. So developmentaldoctor.com is always the best way to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It was great talking to you.